Samsung started its business in 1938 as a small trading company selling vegetables, noodles, and dried fish in South Korea. But if we fast forward to the present day, the Samsung family is one of the richest families in Korea. Today, Samsung doesn't just make mobiles and TVs, they make robots, hospitals, roads, clothes, skyscrapers, and much, much more. They even own South Korea's biggest insurance and credit card companies, and if that's not enough, Samsung even makes tanks and airplanes for the military. On the one hand, Samsung looks like an underdog business empire, a true success story, but on the other hand, it's also a story full of bribery, illegal rise, and countless scandals. This is the crazy and controversial story of Samsung. It was the year 1936 in South Korea. Late at night, a man named Lee Byung-chul had self-realization that he was wasting his life. He knew he had a lot of potential, but he wasn't doing anything with it. That night, he made up his mind. He had to change his life and set a clear goal for himself. And that goal was to start a business and build something of his own. Without wasting any time, Lee opened a small grocery trading store. In the beginning, he only sold rice. But after a few months, he noticed that people weren't buying much. So he decided to travel around the city to see what was really in demand. Luckily, he found out that fresh vegetables, noodles, and dried fish were in high demand. There were a few shops already selling them, but none of them were doing it properly. Because of this, in 1938, Lee decided to add more items to his store: dried fish, fruits, noodles, vegetables, and rice. He gave his store a name, Samsung Trading Company. He chose the name Samsung for a reason. In Korean, Sam means 3, a number that stands for something big, strong, and powerful, while Sung means star, something that shines bright and lasts forever. Looking at Samsung today, that name truly matches what Samsung has become. Within a few months, Lee's business started doing really well. More and more people came to his store and he was making a good amount of money every day. And soon, he became a successful businessman in his town. But this success couldn't last forever and everything suddenly changed. In 1950, the Korean War began. The war had a terrible effect on the whole country and on all businesses. After the war, Korea was left with a shortage of many basic things. The country had to heavily depend on imports. At that time, mostly business collapsed and it looked like Samsung had no chance to survive. But somehow, it did. And not just did, Samsung grew even more and made the business even bigger. After the war, Lee understood how bad the situation was in the country, so with the money he had left, he decided to diversify his business into other areas and started making affordable products for the people of Korea. First, Lee noticed that there was a high demand for sugar, so in 1953, he set up a sugar refinery. The business did well, and with the profit he made from it, he built the largest wood mill in the country. This helped Samsung move into the textile business and start making affordable clothes for the people. During this same time, Lee decided to follow this same strategy even more aggressively. He kept reinvesting the money into entering other new businesses and expanding even more. Like he opened a department store, entered into the insurance business, and kept expanding little by little. In fact, even today, Samsung is one of the biggest insurance companies in South Korea. With all this growth, Lee Byung-chul had become the richest man in the country. But what if I told you, this has just started? In 1968, Samsung's management had a big meeting to decide which business they should enter next. After a long discussion, they chose a business that could change the company's future forever, and it was none other than electronics. Within the next 2 years, Samsung's electronics business was fully set up. In 1970, they made Samsung's first 12-inch black and white TV, and within a few years, they became the #1 manufacturer of black and white TVs in the country. It was all possible because of their assembly line, which helped them make TVs faster, in large numbers, and at an affordable price. With this, Samsung saw they were getting a good response in the electronics market, so they started making all kinds of products, like refrigerators in 1974, ovens in 1979, air conditioner in 1983, and mobile phones in 1999. While making all these products, Samsung realized they were buying many small parts from other companies. Because of this, Samsung decided to buy a semiconductor company to have full control over everything. And not just they used this on their own products, they also started selling these parts to other companies to earn extra money. This way, they opened another income line for Samsung. However, still it is not over yet. Samsung also owns many other big businesses that most people don't even know about. For example, under its division called Samsung Heavy Industries, they build huge ships. There's also another division of the company called Samsung Construction and Trading, which builds tunnels, buildings, airports, and even big bridges. In fact, Samsung builds two of the world's most famous buildings, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai and the Petronas Twin Towers in Malaysia. They even own South Korea's famous theme park called Everland, and there's also a place called Samsung Town, which they own too. Most of us only know Samsung as a mobile or TV company, or maybe for a few other electronics. But they are much bigger than that. This was all about Samsung's profitable businesses, but Samsung also runs many non-profit businesses, such as Samsung School, Samsung Hospitals, Samsung Welfare Foundation, and many, many more. However, if we stop the story right here, it would be a great business success story. A young Korean boy who started with one small grocery trading shop and went on to build a huge business empire by diversifying into many areas. But that's not the full story. The only problem with Samsung's rise was that in many ways it was controversial and illegal. In 1953, after the Korean War ended, South Korea was in very bad condition. The country was not making or selling any goods, and there was almost no money coming in. Also, the economy was extremely weak, and the government was under a lot of pressure to fix the country. At that time, South Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world. With this, it was clear, things need to change as soon as possible. To fix the country's economy, the South Korean government decided to support big Korean businesses. They gave them easy loans, special tax benefits, and protection from outside competition. In easy words, companies like Samsung and a few others got strong help from the government to grow and expand their businesses. The idea was simple, that by helping these big businesses, the whole country's economy would grow. For example, when Samsung started its electronics business, the Korean government banned other electronics companies from selling in South Korea. This meant only Samsung products were available across the country, and people had no choice. They had to buy Samsung products. Around that same time, South Korea also gave a big tax cut. They reduced taxes by 50%, but only for electronics manufacturing businesses, which directly benefited to Samsung. Even when South Korea got relief funds from the USA, the government quietly directed most of that money to Samsung. And that's what helped Samsung grow so fast. Soon, Samsung had already become one of the biggest companies in the country. No one else was even close. Luckily, this was possible because of Samsung's founder, Lee. He was very close to South Korea's top leaders, including the country's presidents. These strong friendships helped a lot. Because of this, Samsung got special treatment that other companies didn't receive. For example, Samsung didn't have to follow the same export limits that smaller companies had to follow. In another case, banks connected to the government gave Samsung very easy loan deals, which made it much easier for them to borrow money and grow even faster. Also, whenever Samsung wanted a license to enter a new industry, they didn't have to wait like other small businesses. They always got it quickly without any problems. It's true that all of this did help South Korea's economy in some ways. Samsung created thousands of jobs, and that gave many families a better life and helped the country move forward. But on the other side, this special treatment from the government made life very tough for smaller businesses. How could a small business survive when Samsung had full government support and endless resources? It was almost impossible for small businesses to survive, because whenever Samsung entered a new market, it had so much money and power that it could easily destroy any small competitor in its way. With so much help from the government, South Korea became too dependent on Samsung. If something goes wrong with Samsung, it could badly affect the whole country because Samsung is connected to so many industries in South Korea. However, after the war, the South Korean government mostly supported big and well-known businesses like LG, Hyundai, and Samsung. All of these were family-owned companies. This meant that just a few families controlled a large part of the country's economy, and with that, they also had a lot of power and influence. It's true that Samsung's founder, Lee, was a very powerful man. He had strong connections with the country's top leaders. But when he died in 1987, his son, Lee Kun-hee, took over the business. And after that, the story became even more controversial because his son did things that were even worse than his father. First, in 1996, Lee Kun-hee was charged with giving a bribe of around $9 million to a former president. But Samsung had close ties with the government, so the president at that time forgave him and no action was taken. Then, in 2008, Lee Kun-hee was accused of running a secret political fund which was used to bribe prosecutors and politicians. He was found guilty of tax evasion and embezzlement. He apologized and stepped down from the company, but he didn't go to jail. Instead, he paid a $100 million fine and returned 45.6 billion won in taxes to the government. And just 2 years later, the new president of South Korea again forgave him, and Lee Kun-hee returned to work as Samsung's chairman like nothing ever happened. So on 2 different times, Lee Kun-hee was charged with bribery, corruption, and tax evasion. But both times, he didn't spend even a single day in jail. He was forgiven even though there was clear proof against him. This shows just how close Samsung and the government really are. Even when someone is found guilty in public, the president can simply cancel the punishment. But the close connection between Samsung and the government didn't stop with the second generation, it went even further. When Lee Kun-hee's son, Jae Lee, took over the company, things got even more intense. He was also found guilty of embezzlement and bribing politicians, just like his father had been. In 2017, Jae Lee was found guilty of bribery and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. But in 2018, the court cut his sentence in half. Because of that, he stayed in jail for only about 1 year. Then in 2021, he was sent back to jail again for the same case, and this time he served around 18 more months. However, I'm sure that if you're watching until now, you are not looking at Samsung business the same as earlier. But wait, this is certainly not the end of the story. Without talking about Samsung's most famous controversial phone, the story of Samsung wouldn't be complete. It was October 5th, 2016. A man was sitting on a Southwest Airlines flight. Just before takeoff, he turned off his new Samsung Galaxy Note 7 and put it in his pocket. But after a few minutes, smoke started coming out of his pocket. The man quickly threw the phone on the floor. He was shocked and scared. It looked like the phone might explode. The smoke got so bad that it filled the entire plane. Luckily, no one was hurt. This was the first time a Samsung Note 7 incident became public. After a few months, more cases started coming out. Several other phones had also caught fire, with dangerous smoke coming out. And there was one thing common in all of them: they were all Samsung Note 7. Samsung already knew about some of these cases, but they didn't take any serious action. Soon, all airlines banned the Samsung Note 7 phone from their flights. Even as more and more reports of phones catching fire came out, Samsung still didn't do anything. However, when the news and media started talking about it everywhere, Samsung finally realized that things were getting out of control. They had no choice but to stop the production and recall all the Note 7 devices from the market. This turned out to be a big loss for Samsung. They lost almost $5.3 billion. But even worse, they lost something more important than money: their reputation. People started losing trust in the brand. Samsung recalled all the Note 7 phones from the market and replaced them with new ones. But things got even more worse. The new phones also started to overheat and catch fire. At first, Samsung blamed the battery for the problem, but the truth was, it wasn't just the battery. The real issue was with the phone's design. The parts inside were packed too tightly, and that's what caused the phones to catch fire. Sadly, it all started in 2016 when Samsung's main goal was to beat Apple by launching the Note 7 before the iPhone 7. Because of this, Samsung's top executives wanted to add lots of new features to the phone, and they also pushed the team to meet a tight deadline with very high expectations. Later, Samsung's engineers said the pressure was too much. It became a stressful and messy rush to finish the phone on time. At that moment, no one realized it. In the race to beat Apple, Samsung had rushed the Note 7's development. They packed in too many features but didn't spend enough time checking if the phone was safe. And before they found the problems, it was already too late. Samsung had sold millions of these dangerous phones around the world and had spent a huge amount of money on Note 7 marketing. Around that same time, people also started trolling Samsung by making funny videos. For example, in the popular GTA 5 game, people were using the Note 7 like it was a grenade, but Samsung didn't like this. They started removing these videos using copyright claims, even though they didn't really have the right to do that. They only did it because they were trying to clean up their image in the market. Despite all the controversies, today Samsung is one of the most successful companies in the world. It makes around 20% of South Korea's entire economy and has created many smart and useful products across the world. It also became the biggest and richest company in South Korea and also a household name around the world. Let me know your thoughts about Samsung down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, I highly recommend you watch one of my favorites, The Gucci Story.